Tom Donaldson is my co-host. I'm Dr. Larry Fedewa, and I am one of your hosts for tonight. And I'm going to start with a personal State of the Union. This is from me, and not from President Joe Biden. And my summary is that the State of the Union is short-term dangerous, but long-term positive. And so I'm going to read some things from my latest column, and it says that the State of the Union is surrounded by actual and potential disasters, namely a 9.7 inflation rate and the producer's price index, southern border sins against humanity, the worst urban crime wave in history, World War III threats in Europe, the Middle East, and the Taiwan Strait, downgrade of military readiness, and perceived abuse of federal and state government powers related to the COVID 19 and the K 12 education, as well as enemy infiltration of higher education. And that's just to name some of the most obvious problems. It's hard to believe that most of these situations have occurred because of actions taken in a single year by the current administration. So no one could say that one could say that the State of the Union is rather dismal. Yet there is hope. The most imminent threats are connected with more or less easily corrected by changes in policy. First in line for change is a radical Biden bias against fossil fuels. The underlying premise of that fossil fuel emission is that fossil fuel emissions cause climate change, and that is nonsense to begin with. There is no convincing evidence to support the assumption, and it is part of the climate change dogma, which, like any dogmatic declaration, is accepted unconditionally, no matter the evidence or the lack thereof. In this case, however, the factual basis is irrelevant because energy is a fundamental requirement for all modern civilization to exist, and there is no alternative source to fossil fuel falls, fossil fossil fuels. Conclusion: fossil fuel is now and for the foreseeable future the primary global source of energy. Therefore, attempts to eliminate or even to downgrade the production of fossil fuels is contrary to the national interest of any nation. Yet, this is what Biden did, starting with the first day of his presidency. These actions have caused a deficit of 1.5 million barrels of oil per day in a country which had a daily surplus just a year ago. And we also had a 100-year surplus still in the ground. It is now necessary for the USA to buy that oil from other countries, and the countries we're buying it from are Russia and the OPEC countries. Have you ever wondered how Putin is financing 150,000 troops on the Ukraine border? He's using our money. He's using the money that we paid him for our oil. Have you ever wondered what his leverage is over Germany? His Nord Stream pipeline under the Baltic Sea was ready to go until Biden reversed the Trump cancellation of that source of energy for Europe. So that little bargain to supply 40% of Europe's energy from income to the US went from income to the USA into a purchase from Russia. And with that, the leverage on Germany for a strategic advantage to Russia and a threat to Germany could lead to the end of NATO. If you've ever wondered what Putin's objectives might be with respect to the fuss he is creating in his threat to Ukraine, you can be assured that the disintegration of NATO is right up there. Biden has made that a real possibility. It wasn't even in the cards before he was elected. And the other little result of our president's attack on our energy industry is that the leading driver of the highest increase in inflation since the Carter administration is the cost of oil, which, by the way, was also the lead in the 1970s inflation. We do have to get through this year, but there is redemption in sight. The most obvious solution to all the Russian problems is to revive the Trump strategy, remove all Biden restrictions on America energy production, revive the Trump denial of German access to Russian energy, reimpose the embargo on Iranian oil sales, and rebuild the American military readiness. The other positive factor is that 80% of American public disapproves of the Biden economy, so the polls tell us. And so redemption is in view. We have to get through this year without any major damage. And of course, there's no guarantee that that can happen. But there is every reason to hope that Republicans can take control of at least the House of Representatives next year and serve as a brake on the Bidens. If with both houses of Congress, a rebuilding of America might well begin, perhaps with the impeachment and removal of Mr. Biden from office. Transcending all these factors, however, is the cause we Americans represent, the freedoms and the values we live and love. The Constitution says we hold these truths to be self evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I was reminded of the power of this creed by the Honorable James S. Baltimore, who appeared as a guest on our internet show, and he believes that all humanity craves the freedom that our forebears brought forth and that we Americans enjoy today. The power of this way of life is manifest in the resolution of the many governments being formed as the Congress as the countries of the former Soviet Union emerge. All seek to replicate the representative democracies. The, and Ambassador Gilmore believes that the totalitarian regimes are on their last legs, that even the vast populations of China and Russia will find leaders to overthrow the regimes under which they now suffer. His faith in our system of government reminds us all of the privilege and the power of our legacy and our corresponding obligation to continue and to improve it as we pass it on to the next generation in the inevitable march through time to an everlasting human improving and ever improving human condition. So God bless America, and it's time for a break. You're listening to the Resistance Hour on the Batchelor News Radio Network.
Since Buffalo Wild Wings is always open late, here are a few things you'll enjoy. Buzzer beaters, wings in 21 signature sauces and seasonings, and great deals on food and beer. Grab select domestic draft beer starting at $4. $4 shareables like street tacos, fried pickles, chili queso dip, mozzarella sticks, and roasted garlic mushrooms, and deals on select liquor and house cocktails. Phew, that's a mouthful. Catch all of the late night action. Buffalo Wild Wings, wings, beer, sports. Offers and participation vary. Please drink responsibly. Void where prohibited.
You're listening to the...
Yeah, don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, you can see... Yeah, you can see...
Go ahead, Tom.
Like I said, we had to make some announcements just to make sure people know you can listen to this show every day, 1 and 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on the bachelornews.airtime.pro. Also, if you contact LA Batchelor at labachelor40gmail.com. You can also get some advertising rates. We got as low as $50 to advertise on this show. So we got some bargains. Just email and we'll get the sales staff out to you. And don't forget, I do have to mention my book is available, America at the Abyss, at barnesandnoble.com and Amazon.com and LibertyHillPublishingPress.com. And now we're back to the Dr. Larry Resistance Hour with his co-host, yours truly, Tom.
So that's my State of the Union, Tom. It's your turn.
Yeah. Well, I mean, here it comes. You make some, hopeful. I mean, like I say, you're an optimist, and I'm kind of reminded of the old line. Years and years ago, it was in the 1980s. It was during the end of the Carter years. It was the 1980 election. And I had this gentleman say, the end is coming. The decline is coming. Exo and Exxon. And finally said, why? I can't think that way because I got 2 kids.
Yeah.
And so therefore, and so I'm an optimist. And I still am an optimist. And I know you are too, because you don't have kids, but you got grandkids now, correct?
That's correct.
That's correct. So here's the thing. I mean, I would look at this. You make a good point. Start with the energy situation, because this, to me, it's one of the cruxes that we have.
That's
because it's not just about energy, but it's in fact, you have an administration that's basically making it clear certain industries will be allowed to exist and certain industries will be crushed or eliminated by government fiat if possible. I mean, this is one of the issues we've had, for example, with one of the Biden's nominees to the
Federal Reserve. Yeah, Federal Reserve.
Yeah. And she and the thing is, she made it clear, we're going to use the banking system to to basically bankrupt these companies. We're going to get rid of the capital for them. And so this is a kind of the dangerous aspect comes into play, because we have, for the first time, an ideology that states government is going to determine which businesses succeeds, which business fails, which businesses will even be allowed to exist. And you made the point very clearly. And the one thing is people don't like to see their energy. They don't want to have to, go to the, gas station and see, let's say they're paying on the average $1 to $1.50 more than they paid last year. That means in effect, you're talking about if you put in 15 gallons in your car, which is I do, that's about almost $20 more than what I was paying last year. And when you start multiplying that by, you multiply it by millions of people doing this routinely. If you just fill up your car 2 or 3 times a month, you're talking what, $45-$60 a month, just that alone. Yeah.
Well, they're talking $5 a gallon.
Yeah.
Easily, and some of them say that it's going to $8.
Yeah. And I think, what we have found out, because here's the interesting aspect about the Ukrainian situation. And this is a point, if you read, as optimistic as Gilmore was, if you read between the lines, I mean, he made it clear, what I understood, that, okay, sanctions as far as we're going to go. And is that enough to deter Putin? That's to me the interesting question because Gilmore didn't necessarily say we're going to send in the Marines. He did say we need to get tough on sanctions, and we need to make it clear to him that we're not going to allow him to veto whoever we want in NATO either. Not just do Ukraine, but he was certainly talking about.
But he's very skeptical that Putin really wants to invade.
Yeah.
He says that what the cost in manpower and in treasure and in consistent guerrilla warfare is just not worth it. And that he's not really if all this is not this invasion talk, is that just that it's talk, and it's not really his goal. His goal is to get his immediate goal is to get influence over Ukraine, and then that also gets a buffer between him and NATO, and that's his real intention. Now he also said he doesn't know that, and he started off by saying, this is my opinion, but his opinion is pretty widely held in the intelligence community, and they don't think that he's really, and in fact, what we're hearing all about this imminent invasion of Ukraine by the Russians is really a diversionary tactic on the part of the Democrat Party to keep everybody from talking too much about the trial that's going to be coming up based upon the indictments that have been made by the special counsel. And that happened, remember, on Friday night. And that all weekend, nobody talked about that on the main media. It was just they're all talking about this big deal about Ukraine.
That could be. It could also be the fact that you got him. I mean, he just had also Friday. The producer yesterday. I mean, he had that week the consumer price index, which shot up, and it was 7.5%. And then the producer price today went 9.7%.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
that's a leading indicator too.
Yeah, it's a leading indicator. I'm not as certain as dealing with the indictments per se, because right now they're impacting Hillary Clinton more than they're impacting Joe Biden at this point. Even though I had my own view is Joe Biden knew from day one that this was a farce.
Oh, of course.
Because he was briefed on it by John Brennan, of all people, who will spend the next 4 years lying to people about the Russian collusion hoax on the various networks that he has. That he was basically getting paid six figures to discuss issues. But I would say, the key element to me is that this is, dealing with the energy crisis and dealing with, let's say, the Ukrainian situation, is that they are connected. You make a good point.
Oh, yeah,
they're connected because we basically gave up that leverage. And knowing that, I mean, the biggest danger we may have, and this is a point was discussed last week. Now again, Gilmore is a optimist in this. I'm going to say at this point I'm a halfway optimist. Depends on the trajectory, because also when you deal with, let's say, freedom, and let's say the impulse for people to want to be free, it also begins with the fact that the main promoter of that, the United States, also has to have a similar belief that this indeed is happening. And I'm not always convinced that some of our national leaders or some of our elites are as convinced, have the same desires than, let's say, what we saw during the Cold War, where literally, if you were a Republican and Democrat, it wouldn't have mattered. You believed in the greatness of the United States.
Well, the far left certainly doesn't accept. They don't believe in the greatness of the United States. In fact, they're putting us down all the time.
Yeah. But yeah, and the point I'm going to make, and that's it. But the thing is, they're the ones that control a good portion of the Democratic Party. It's not like, they're outliers anymore. They're as much part of the establishment of the Democratic Party as what we would call the moderates, or the old moderates. But I do find it fascinating, the Durham report. I think, again, it's interesting, the media, what they don't say, because this kind of demonstrates two things. Number one, demonstrated not only was the Russian collusion hoax a hoax, but that Hillary Clinton is up to her eyeballs. But here's the question I have, because they're making the accusation that they were still spying on the Trump administration.
Yeah.
Now, here's my question to you.
That's scary.
Now, here's my question to you. The only way that a private citizen like Hillary Clinton would have gotten away with that, to continue that spying, is they had to be people within the Department of Justice, the FBI, or the CIA, that allowed that to happen and worked with her.
The Secret Service.
Yeah. I mean, you tell me. I mean, how does a private citizen continue that under those circumstances unless there was some inside help?
Well, there's even what I'm concerned about even more than that is how did that company get? How are they able to hack into the mail stream of the president of the United States? I mean, that says that our protection of the secrecy of our system is very is very faulty, very very fragile. I mean, how could they get into the president's email, for God's sake?
Well,
I mean,
again, I'm just telling you. To me, there's a logical explanation. And that means you had people within the intelligence or the FBI or
you're saying they
had inside help.
insiders.
Absolutely. How else would you explain that? And you got to remember, the
other way to explain it would be that they came in the way hackers do. They came in because they figured it out. And either way, in fact, it's probably a combination of both those things.
Yeah, because you got to remember, because basically they were, the FBI was in fact using the FBI was in fact using that dossier as evidence to get warrants, and they continued to use that after he went into the presidency. So, that was the whole basis of the Mueller report, basically, and that was the whole basis of the investigation.
But it's one thing to be hacking into a candidate, because that is in the public. It's closer to the public realm but hacking into the private conversations of the president of the United States, no matter who it is. I don't care whether it's Truman or not Truman, Trump, Trump or Obama or anybody. I mean, that is scary stuff, because if that company can do it, so can China, so can Russia, so can anybody, so can the mafia, for that matter. Well, let's hold that thought. We're listening to the Resistance Hour on the Batchelor News Radio Network.
Since Buffalo Wild Wings is always open late, here are a few things you'll enjoy. Buzzer beaters, wings in 21 signature sauces and seasonings, and great deals on food and beer. Grab select domestic draft beers starting at $4. $4 shareables like street tacos, fried pickles, chili queso dip, mozzarella sticks, and roasted garlic mushrooms, and deals on select liquor and house cocktails. Phew, that's a mouthful. Catch all of the late night action. Buffalo Wild Wings. Wings, beer, sports. Offers and participation vary. Please drink responsibly. Void where prohibited.
And don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, you can listen to this show every day on the BachelorNews.airtime.pro, 1 p.m. and 7 p.m. Bachelor News Network.airtime.pro, And also, if you want to do any ads on this show, we have some deals starting at $50. You go to labachelor40@gmail.com. And I'll tell you what else. You could even DM me and say at Twitter at Donaldson Files, say, Tom, I want to be on both the Donaldson Files Wednesday edition and the Resistance Hour. And we'll send out a staff to get the best deal for you. And don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, my book, America at the Abyss, is available at barnesandnoble.com, Amazon.com, and Liberty Hill Press Publishing.com. And you can also get it at a local bookstore. And now we'll go back to Dr. Larry.
Okay. I think I agree with you that the energy problem, the energy policy and its implementation is really the central stem from which a lot of this, both in foreign policy and in the current, what I consider the recessional bound inflation. I don't see any way that, and of course the Fed is also responsible here. That's the other angle. But given the ideological bias of the new Federal Reserve, and the cooperation of the new Secretary of the Treasury, which is Yellen, I don't see any possible way to avoid a pretty serious recession coming down here another couple days, maybe another year or two, and not two, but probably one, unless and even if we get an approach like the way that Reagan did it, with a severe increase in interest rates, that was a pretty tough recession. It didn't last very long, but it was a pretty tough times in order to get out of the recession, the inflation that the Carter administration had.
Well, that's the danger you have, because the problem you run into, and certainly, you talk to, it's kind of interesting because there's a lot of optimism even within the market that we're going to muddle through this, but there's a point somewhere where the Federal Reserve has to raise rates or have to, slow down the monetary growth. I mean, they're starting to do that now through the tapering aspect of QE.
Yeah,
and we know that they're going to be raising rates in March, which was a lot sooner than what the original game plan was a year ago. And so once you start raising those rates and you start tapering the monetary, and you start controlling that monetary policy, you're going to see some economic dislocation as a result of that. If you want to use, to me, that's unavoidable. And you're absolutely correct. And the other aspect that comes into play here is, where's the growth-oriented policies? I don't see. I mean, what I see is a lot of what I'm going to use the word Keynesian economics on steroids. We're going to spend trillions of dollars. I mean, we're going to increase already a couple $1 trillion already this year. And certainly, if we look at the Build Back Better, or the BBB, you're looking at another couple of trillion. I mean, another 2 to 6 trillion over the next decade. So, you got to be asking yourself, where's the growth-oriented policy? Where are the, let's say, policies to get people to produce more, to earn more, and invest more? Those are the policies that that this administration is not talking about. And if you don't put that as part of the equation, again, the inflationary cycle will continue for one simple reason: you're not producing enough goods to take up that excessive monetary policy. Your thoughts?
Well, I think the chances of the Biden's doing anything like that, anything besides try to expand government, are zero to none on their own. Now, if they got if they got into a situation like Clinton did, where he had Republican Congress, total Republican, and then he also saw that his chances of reelection were going to. Remember, he came out and said the time of big government is over.
Yes.
And that, I mean, in that particular election, I couldn't tell who was a Republican because
Well, here's here's
they
the
both
interesting.
had
Yeah.
philosophy.
Yeah.
But the chances of that happening with Biden, I don't think are very great.
Yeah, I mean, you got the 1990 because here's the aspect came. There was the other aspect came into play is that they had Hillary and Robert Reich attempted the Hillary Care and an expansion government, which was rejected. And as I like to say, you had the adults like Robert Rubin come back in and say, okay, let's make a deal with Newt Gingrich. Let's see what we can solve. Because you got to remember the one aspect. They did raise the marginal tax rate to 39%, but they also lowered the capital gains tax. And they both agreed on the welfare reform, and they both agreed on, keeping, the growth of government spending in line. And that was the basis
That
of
was
the.
Bob Livingston.
Hmm?
That was Bob Livingston.
No, that was Newt Gingrich. Livingston didn't come until
Well, Gingrich was he was a speaker, but the head of the budget committee was
okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah,
was
I forgot
Livingston.
about that. Yeah, Bob was
Yeah,
Bob was that. I forgot about that. Yeah, we got to bring him back on the show.
yeah.
Yeah,
I
we
I
need.
talk, I have him. I have his interest. He
Yeah,
just had he's the last two times that I asked him, he had other.
yeah,
We'll get him back.
yeah. I was gonna say, how could you not want to be on this show, especially now that.
Especially handsome as he is.
Yeah, well, I was thinking of the two of us, but that's okay. but but yeah, I think I mean I mean the question comes in play is would he do that? But here, let me take this even a step further. In 2000, in the 2000 was a 12 to 13. You look in that particular era, 11, 12, and 13. You know, it was right after the Obama Budget Deficit Commission, which actually had some pretty good ideas that nobody really, but I think what it came down to is like John Boehner said, okay, I'll make you a deal. Let's put a sequester. We'll take 50% defense, 50% this. Or I take it back. Obama did that on the idea. He called, Boehner's bluff. He said, okay, let's do a sequester. And Boehner said, okay. And he did. I mean, he accepted the deal. And that basically, again, in the second half of the Obama era, you did again see some slowdown in government spending over the last,
Most of it was military, though.
Yeah, it was military. Yeah, it was mostly military, but
And that's what happened to our readiness was just completely in the basement.
Well, but unfortunately, I mean, the
Trump
thing
had
is,
to build it up.
what Trump had to build it up, but as the old saying goes, elections have consequences. But the reality is, it goes back to what you're saying. Could a speaker, Kevin McCarthy, go to a Joe Biden and a President Biden and say, "Look, here's the deal. We'll do a sequester. We'll have some here, and is that a possibility? I don't know. I think I'm more or less with you that it would be far more difficult with Biden than it was with Obama, only because.
Well,
that they're really, I mean, you only got two moderates left in the Democratic Party, and one of them, Joe Manchin, has already called for increased taxes as part of any future deals.
Yeah, which means they aren't going to do it.
Yeah.
I think that's basically a strategy to get them to back off because they don't want to raise, on top of everything else, they don't want to raise taxes. I mean, they've screwed up enough things, let alone that, especially between now and next November.
Well, like I say, we're going to see because I mean, again, like you say, the question is going to come up because the inflation aspect will come into play, uh, and and the difference will be,
That's the hardest tax of all.
and that's the hardest tax of all, but it's also the most painful thing to take care of too.
It
And
is.
that's the question comes into play. Plus, and it goes, and again, I go back to my original point: where are the ideas to increase growth in the economy, increase the pie? I
They
mean, right
don't.
now,
They don't
right?
understand that. They don't understand how to do that.
Yeah,
That's not even on their agenda. I mean,
yeah.
they don't. That's not even in the realm of their knowledge for the most part. I mean, they don't. They just don't know. I mean, if you have any doubts about how sophisticated they are in terms of their knowledge of economics, just listen to Biden talk for a few minutes. I mean, he has no concept. He and Pelosi have just no concept at all of how the economy works.
Yeah.
You know,
Well,
I mean, if you say the way to solve inflation is to get more government grants and
yeah.
spend more government business. I mean, you've got to realize somebody that says that just doesn't have
Well,
it's laughable.
well, not only that, but you also have, let's say, within a good portion of the Democratic Party, what we call modern. I don't know if you have modern monetary theory, which is basically means since
Which is
we're
stupid, which is not not economics at all.
it's not. I mean, you want to talk about voodoo economics? That is very worse. It's like we can print as much money as we want because the dollar is the world
Reserve currency.
reserve currency. There's only so much. Yeah, after a while, people start debate. You're going to have that point where people are going to say, do we really want to trust the United States to have the dollar currency? But certainly, I mean, it is.
Well, that's being widely
Yeah,
uh,
yeah,
attacked now. Not only do you have the Chinese trying to get the yuan uh, as being the reserve currency, but to the midway to that is the monetary fund, and they got the IMF reserve uh,
yeah,
is now actually been accepted as a reserve currency, and that's because of this lady. What's her name who's the head of the IMF now? Oh,
uh,
she
but,
I can't think of her name, but she actually has been very very active in reducing the power of or at least increasing the power of the IMF reserves. They have a reserve certificate that they're using as a reserve currency now, and
yeah,
so and guess who's behind mostly using it mostly is the Chinese.
yeah. Christine Lagarde. That's the lady's
Yeah,
name.
that's it. Yeah,
Christine Lagarde.
like
Lagarde. Yes. So, but yeah. So we. Yeah.
and
So
Obama is the one that he promoted the idea of getting the Chinese when he became got to be was elected. The Chinese vote in the IMF was something like approximately the same as um, South American countries, 3%. But before we go into that, we have to take a break. We're in the Resistance Hour on the Batchelor News Radio Network.
Required listening with Amazon Music.
Dad music again?
The greatest guitarist of all time.
Wait, who?
Alexa, add this song to a new playlist.
Sure, what's the new playlist name?
Jack's Intro to Classic Rock.
Adding Stepping Stone by Jimi Hendrix to Jack's Intro to Classic Rock playlist. Amazon Music, the simplest way to listen to the music you and soon he will love. New customers start your 30-day free trial at AmazonMusic.com. Renews automatically, cancel anytime.
And don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, you can listen to this show and other great shows on the Batchelor News Radio Network on the batchelornews.airtime.pro. This show is every day, 11 a.m., 1 and 7, 1 p.m. and 7 p.m., 1 p.m. and 7 p.m. every day on the batchelornews.airtime.pro. If you want to advertise, labachelor40@gmail.com. And if you want any, and I did, by the way, on my own, on my Twitter site, you will have my the link to the show. So if you want to join in for the last 20 minutes, feel free to do so with questions, and some of us might even consider answering those questions. So so feel free to comment, and
If it's a good question, we'll answer it.
Yeah, if it's a good question, we'll answer. Yes. So all right.
Well, I was just mentioning about how the Chinese went from like a 3% vote to equal to the United States, and Obama promoted that, and that's when he and that's when Chinese and Christine Lagarde got together and started to undermine the dollar as a reserve currency. And now they're going all over Asia, and particularly Asia and Africa. And they've got this fund now that is basically what they do is they find a bridge or a railroad or a highway or something that one of these countries wants to build. They lend them the money against a control of this or that, control of the highway or the building or whatever it is, the rent on the building, and then they all of a sudden the other country can't pay it back, so they then start taking over other assets within that country. And this is happening in particularly in Africa and in some of the smaller countries in Asia, where they're actually getting through their financing, they're getting control of more and more of the assets of those other countries. And it's a version of what they tried to do with us with real estate. But we, of course, are too big to get that kind of reaction. But it's that's another way the Chinese are trying to become the preeminent kind of superpower.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. I mean, yeah, you're absolutely right. And it's but it's also kind of interesting. Christine Lagarde is basically, I mean, she's also part of the EU. She's always been one of the big promoters of the EU as a independent force against the United States, which is always, you've always had that intellectual aspect that's developed in the EU over the past several years.
Well, the whole French nation feels that way.
Well, it's not just the French nation anymore. It's also you got the Germans. So
the Germans are not so. They're not so. Surprisingly, they're not so interested in taking over being against the United States, which is interesting because in the Second World War, the French were our allies and and the Germans were our enemy.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, by the way, just real quick message here. We just got a message here just to let you know that LA Batchelor at YouTube. You can watch the show at YouTube, LA Batchelor at YouTube as well. In fact, I have just been notified that we now have a new follower to the Resistance Hour be on that. I've just been informed. So
A new follower?
A new follower. That's of the show. That's absolutely yes. But yeah, and now back to the more serious aspect of our show. Well, you're absolutely correct. But and maybe it gets back to let's get back to the original purpose of your State of the Union. And And I'm getting the impression, and I'm going to ask you this, is that it's going to be that your hopefulness is that we're all going to start learning these lessons. That way, the short term there'll be pain, the long term is going to be positive because we're going to be, I guess, rethinking all of the mistakes we made and maybe correct those mistakes. Would that be a fair assessment?
I don't think it's so much learning as it is getting new leadership. I mean, getting more conservative leadership.
Yeah.
I think that's our main. If that doesn't happen in the next election,
Yeah.
I don't know we're ever going to have another Republican victory. One thing that's good, that's really, I didn't mention it, but it's really good, and that is that we've got the states finally getting active in this whole business of integrity of the vote. And election integrity is critical to the continued existence of any kind of opposition party to the Democrats. Because otherwise the Democrats are going to keep stealing elections, and they'll have all the dead people in the world on their
Yeah.
election going into the voting. So yeah, but no, what I think, I think the major damage, the major danger of the entire international order, as well as the domestic issues, I think it's in this current year, and I think this is a way that the Chinese and the Russians also feel, because I think that they're very aware of the fact that we're looking at the possibility of a red surge next November, and if that happens, their chances of getting away with things like annexing parts of Ukraine, and particularly the Taiwan Strait. I'm really worried about that. But
Well, let
I
me
think
ask you another question. I'm
I
going to throw
think
this out.
their chances of getting in and getting something done is in this year.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this other question, because here's the other. This is what Gilmore made a very interesting point, and I see where he was coming from. But the more I thought about it, the more I'm thinking, and that is this. He said the immediate threat obviously was the Ukraine and Russia, but he didn't necessarily say that but he didn't really come in with the long. He wasn't strong enough to me anyway that the long-term threat is China.
Oh,
Or did I misinterpret what I
yeah,
thought he said?
yeah, you did, because you get him going on China, and
Yeah.
he's very, very concerned about China.
Okay, that's right. Right, because like I say, I didn't know if he was just simply making the point. Hey, the number one threat right now is Russia and the Ukraine, and he did mention down the road China, but and again, it's maybe it's the way he said it, or maybe my misinterpretation of it.
Well,
But,
we kept asking him about Ukraine mainly,
yeah.
and we
Yes.
didn't. He said a couple of times. He said, "Well, we won't talk about China now because we're concentrating on Ukraine." But he's more concerned about China than he is about Russia,
Mhm.
and I think that's
Okay.
valid. I think we ought to be.
Yeah, we are. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's okay then. Now I'm much more really, like I said, maybe I was just misinterpreting, and maybe the fact we were talking about Ukraine,
Yeah.
because I was trying to get a system. Okay, who's the long term bigger threat? To me, the long term bigger threat is going to be China. But he did make a very fascinating point that what we're looking at with Russia and China is basically changing the world order to a more authoritative governments, the encouragement of more authoritative governments, or in my view,
Authoritarian,
totalitarian government. And I think that's a point that doesn't get discussed too often when we discuss these issues, because the question is, what does China control world mean? And I think it's a question we need to start asking ourselves in this country. What does it mean? And because to me, that is the crux of the foreign policy of the next, 2 decades is that, you know, what would a China controlled world look like? And I always, he made a very good point. It's not going to be pleasant. It's going to be less freedom, less prosperity, and more control and more basically totalitarian or authoritative regimes around the world being encouraged.
But he also made the point, and
Yeah.
I thought that this was really, really quite surprising, and
Yeah.
I think worth thinking about again. He said he thinks that this is the last gasp of totalitarianism. He thinks that this, that our philosophy and our values of representative democracy are spreading. Every country that overcomes totalitarianism does exactly moves in our direction, and that they're he feels that all of these totalitarian regimes are they're in very limited time because that
Mm.
our approach to, and this is where we got into television and the radios and
Yeah.
movies, is where
Yeah.
people of the whole world now are able to see the way we live, and it's very impressive to a lot of them.
Well,
And
here, but let me throw here. I'm like I say, I see his argument. I hope he's right. But the problem that I have, and this
so
is,
am I hope so.
here's the yeah, here's the problem I have. I mean, just let's look at what's going on in Canada right now. I mean, literally.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
well,
mean, I mean, we're talking emergency law, where, and I think,
yeah,
and
but
we're talking about,
they're not getting away with it.
yeah. Well,
I
so
mean,
far, yeah,
their court has already
yeah,
trimmed the
yeah.
what's his name?
Trudeau.
Yeah, Trudeau's his wings. They've already stopped a couple of these things that he tried to do under some emergency
Yeah.
governing. It's interesting to see what happens because
It will be because here's the thing. I mean, here's what
he's
he's doing.
getting more and more totalitarian.
I mean, yeah, I mean, because here's what he's talking about. I mean, he's talking about going into people's bank account and freezing them and taking their money
Yeah,
if you don't play ball with us. Uh, you know, I mean, it's gotten to a point where, let's say, there was a story I read where an individual received a note from a reporter asking why he was giving money to the Freedom of Convoy, and basically, what it was coming down to is they're getting the names of the donors. And the question is, what are you going to do with that name of those people, of those donors, whether you give $20 or whatever? And this is a dangerous aspect that comes into play because he's talking about literally, we're going to starve these people from funding. And when we get to that point where a government thinks they're strong enough in a political discussion to basically say, we don't like what you're doing and we're going to starve you of finances. We're going to make it difficult for you to keep your license or your insurance as a truck driver. Yeah, that's, you're going. I mean, these are the things they were talking about in Canada to do.
yeah, Trudeau is, and it's interesting to see whether he's going to get away with it because so far he hasn't.
Well,
But interesting also, it's also interesting because he keeps his evolution is increasingly toward being more and more authoritarian
yeah,
and total. He's getting to be totalitarian.
yeah. But again, now I'm going to go back to the point we were just talking about. Uh, freedom, the importance of freedom, because it's important for those of us in the West to defend this aspect. And when you have a major capitalist free state instituting these kinds of reforms against their own people, that tells me you got to hold leaders, a good portion of that leadership class in Canada that just quite frankly are perfectly authoritative. And I guarantee you, we got people within our own government that would love to be able to do the same thing. And that's to me, it's the leadership class it's that leadership class that
I
we're
think
seeing.
every country has those people. It's a
Well, they
question
do,
of
but
trying to keep them from getting into power.
yeah.
That's,
Well,
that's
but
I
in
mean,
Canada,
look at Hillary Clinton.
yeah, but here in Canada and the United States, they're in power. They have power. They're part of the power structure, and they have enough significant power. I mean, we just can look at how we dealt with the virus. I mean, we're talking about a virus that kills 0.2 to 0.4%. I mean, that's the infection fatality rate, which is it's higher than the flu season, but certainly lower than, let's say, the infection fatality rate we would have saw in the Spanish flu. And look at the number of emergency controls by many state governments from mandates that they engineered. So I mean,
but now look at the protests against it too.
Yeah. Now, we're seeing it now, and we're also seeing the fact that we're also now seeing the fact that these people, we're seeing that the governors themselves are obviously reading some polls because they're running as quickly as possible away from the mandates that they've been engineering for 2 years.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess the good news is that.
Well,
but,
that is the good news. I mean,
yeah.
the good news is that we see polls and they start changing, and you wouldn't, in a totalitarian government, there wouldn't be any polls to begin with, and secondly, even if there were, they wouldn't change anything.
Well, I'm going to say this: to
no
me, the real kill element that comes into play here is going to be.
We're almost to the end of the program here.
That's yeah. You're absolutely right. We're at it, but I guess my final point is going to be is this: the Canadians now have the fate in their hands in the next election. For all intents and purposes, Trudeau has a minority government, not necessarily a majority government. He does not have the majority at the parliament. He has to govern with the permission of other parties within that structure. The question that comes into play is, is there a point where even that he gets that vote of no confidence? Because there are even some people within his own party that said, you're gone too far. And if we get to that point, then the Canadians are going to have a choice. That is, do you get rid of this guy? Do you vote him out of office? And we'll see.
And that's the way to get back at him, and that's also the mechanism by which we are going to survive. And the answer to your question, can we survive, it depends on the election. If we don't get the right people in the leadership, then our way of life that we have invented, and only the first one in the entire world, is to start to be forsaken by us. But I think we're about out of time here, Tom.
Yeah.
So we're going to have to say goodnight to our listeners and viewers. And we still say, God bless America. And for heaven's sake, we need it.